Namaskar, dear learners. Myself, Dr. Ajay Jha, lecturer of history at Directorate of Education, Government of NCT of Delhi. I welcome you all to the live session of NIOS. In today's session, we'll talk about the medieval world for secondary level. Friends, today's main subtopics are Europe in medieval times, decline of the Roman Empire, feudalism and the political, military and socio aspects of feudalism. Then we will talk about the Arab civilization in medieval period, and finally we will look at the medieval Indian civilization. Now, the question is, at the end of the session, what will we learn? So, let us look at the learning outcomes of this session. Friends, at the end of the session, you will be able to identify the medieval period as an important stage in the evolution of human society. Then, you will be able to describe the changes in the political organization that took place after the collapse of the Roman Empire. Then you will be able to explain the political, military and socio-economic aspects of feudalism as it existed in Western Europe. Then you will be able to describe the evolution of Islamic religion, society and polity in West Asia. You will be able to describe the main features of medieval Indian economy, and finally you will be able to analyze how cultural and religious life during the medieval period in India represented a unique tradition of synthesis. With this introduction, let us start our session for the day. The first question is, what was medieval period? Friends, medieval period is also called the Middle Ages. This was basically the period between ancient and the modern period. When we talk of the term Middle Ages, basically it was coined by the Europeans in the 17th century. In early part of the medieval period, the level of material and cultural accomplishment was very low in Europe. But during latter period, it was seen that the Europeans greatly improved their standard of living. Now, in medieval period, how could the Europeans greatly improve their standard of living? That is very important for us to understand. Whereas we all know that in the initial period, their cultural accomplishment or their education level was very low. Let us look at that. See, in the latter part of the period, they were able to develop new institutions of learning. They also developed new models of thoughts and reached a very high standard in literature as well as art. New ideas that emerged during this time not only transformed Europe but also had a deep impact on the rest of the world in time to come. So that is how in Middle Ages, Europeans were able to gain education, gain height as far as culture is developed, and they could impress the whole world. Let us try to find out what was happening in the other parts of the world during this period, and we will start with the decline of Roman Empire. Friends, Roman Empire, the great empire which was divided into three different continents, namely the Europe, Asia and Africa. It was divided into two parts, Western territories and Eastern territories. Capital of Western territory was Rome. Roman Emperor Constantine set up the capital of Eastern territories in 330 AD at Constantinople. Let me remind you that the name of Constantinople was named after the Roman Emperor Constantine. If we talk of Eastern civilization only, it is very important to note that Eastern civilization of Greek speaking people reached very high standard of economic and cultural life at a time when Western Europe was in a relatively backward condition. So point is how they could do it, how Eastern territory of the Roman Empire could reach to that extent. Let's try to find out. Friends, it was around 476 AD that various Germanic tribes like the Goths, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Franks, they all started attacking Roman Empire. And after invading this area, they established their separate successor states. When they established separate successor state, now on Roman culture did not remain single culture or aloof. It got mixed with the Germanic society and it came into close contact with each other, and finally the Roman and the Germanic societies merged with each other. What was the result of that? Result of that was a new type of society was born in Europe with institutions and systems that were quite different either from Roman or Germanic ones. It was totally a new kind of society with new kind of learning and with new kind of culture. Most important institutions that developed after the invasion of Germanic tribes like Goths, Vandals, Visigoths and Franks, and when they established their own successor states, the most important institution that came into existence was feudalism. Let us try to understand what feudalism was, how it changed the whole scenario in Europe as far as agriculture is concerned and trade is concerned. If we talk of feudalism, it was basically a hierarchical organization of political sovereignty. It was an hierarchical organization, and top of the hierarchy was the king. Below the king were big landlords, and they were known as dukes and earls. Below the dukes and earls, there were lesser lords, and they were known as barons. And below the barons were lesser lords. And at the lowest category of this hierarchy was the knights. So it was a complete hierarchy which has its own political sovereignty. Now point is, how did feudalism work and how it impacted the life of people? Let us try to see next. Friends, when we talk of feudalism, it is very important for us to note that below the kings were bigger lords known as either dukes or the earls, and below them were the lesser lords, and the lesser lords took their loyalty from their lords, and they also vowed to remain loyal to them who were just above them. And these lesser lords who worked for the bigger lords were known as their vassals. A vassal would take a vow to serve his lord all his life. That means he promised his lord to remain loyal to him and serve him for whole of his life. In turn, the bigger lord would give him protection. He would promise him that the lesser lord would be protected all his life if he remains loyal to him. And in turn, the bigger lord made a grant to him, and this grant was usually in the form of land, and this land was given to the lesser lord for sustenance purpose, and it was known as fief or fiefdom. From this fief or fiefdom only the word feudalism is derived. In return, the vassal had to provide a certain number of troops whenever it was required by the lord. So, the lord gave the lesser lord or his vassals the land known as fief, and in turn the lesser lord had to serve him for whole of his life and had to provide army services also whenever his lord required it. And with this military power, the lords also became the complete master of their area, and they became so strong that even the state could not challenge them at times, because they had the resources, they had the military power, and they had a big band of supporters. So, that was all about feudalism. Now, the question is, where did these lords live? How did they operate? That is very important for us to understand. So, let me tell you that these lords, they lived in an landed state, and it was total under his control, and the entire area where the lords lived were known as manor. And this land surrounding the manor house was divided into 3 parts. The whole area was known as manor, and the whole manor house and the entire area around it was divided into 3 parts. Which were these 3 parts? The first part was the land for the use of the lord. That means it was the land which was totally dedicated to the lord himself, and whatever production took place in that land was entirely the lord's property. Then there were arable lands, and it was granted to the parcels to the peasants, and peasants living inside the manor house area could use this arable land. And then the third part was meadowlands. This meadowlands available in the manor house was generally used by everyone as grazing lands, where the cattle could be grazed. So, it was a grazing land, but very important to note for us is that all these 3 parts of lands were available inside the manor house. Let us move forward and look at this sketch. This sketch is of a feudal manor. Here you can see in the central area there is a manor house where the lord lived with his family, and just in front of the manor house is a well which was used for water. Then there are 3 fields, first field, second field and third field behind the manor house, and in front of them there are serfs' houses. So, this was the sketch of a general feudal manor. Friends, let us look at the life of the serfs now. Serfs were basically dependent peasants of medieval Europe. They were tied to the soil and completely subject to the authority of the lord. These peasants, which were completely dependent on the lord, were known as serfs. A major portion of the wealth that was generated by the lords during this period was through the exploitation of these serfs only. These serfs were regarded as tenants of the manor. Being tenants, they had to pay rents, and this rent was paid by the peasants in the form of labor services to the lord. Mind you, it was not in the form of cash but it was in the form of labor services that the serfs had to pay to his lords. And not only that, the serfs had to put in extra labor during agricultural seasons when the plugging were going on, harvesting was going on, or the threshing was required. During these periods, the serfs had to work very hard. Not only that, the serfs had to pay some dues and taxes in kind as well, because the lords also extracted from the peasants in an indirect manner. In direct manner, they had to work on the fields of the lord, but not only that, they had to work indirectly also. How this indirect work was done and how the lords extracted the indirect manner was a self-sufficient economic unit, friends. It was self-sufficient because there were various facilities available in the manor house. For example, there were smithies for turning out iron objects. There were flour mills for grinding wheat or corn. There were ovens for making breads. There were wine presses for making wine from grapes. And there were various workshops for making products of everyday use. And the serfs were forced to use these facilities free of cost. They were not paid any kind of wages for their services on these economic unit of the manor house. So, to conclude, we can say that the condition of serf was very bad during the Middle Ages of Europe. Serfs were like just slaves. In fact, they were known as agricultural slaves also. Now, till now, whatever we have learned, based on that, let us do an activity. What activity you are supposed to do? You are supposed to find out the conditions of present day Indian farmers who do not own lands and work in other people's fields. You can take help of newspaper, or you can talk to your elders in this regard and collect information. After that, you need to compare the lives of the feudal serfs with the Roman slaves and the present day Indian farmers. Mind you, friend, I am talking about comparing the lives of the feudal serfs with the Roman slaves and present day Indian farmers. After comparing this information, write a brief report about your findings. So, friends, till now we talked about feudalism and its features. Now, let us talk about the changes in feudal economy and development in agriculture. It is a very interesting fact that there was an increase in agricultural fields. Significant improvement in agricultural technique took place during this period. Now, the new heavier plows were introduced with wheels and they were drawn by oxen. It was a great improvement in agricultural technique. Not only that, they tried to introduce a new system of crop also. Now, three-field system was introduced, in which 1/3 of the land was left fallow. That means no agriculture took place on that. 1/3 was used for cultivating autumn crop and 1/3 was used for spring crop. This increased the cropped area. At the same time, this increased the agricultural production several times. So, it was a new change in feudal economy when the development in agriculture took place during the middle period. Now, when we talk of agriculture, it was directly related to the rural areas. But during this period, not only the rural areas but also the towns saw great development, and revival of trade was seen in the town life. Along with the expansion in agricultural period from 10th to 12th century, it witnessed a revival of trade and growth of town life. Trade ranged from the small trade to local markets where peasants sold their excess grains or eggs and brought long distance trade products like wine or cotton. Improvement in road building took place, and it helped in rural transport. Rivers and sea routes were also used for trade. So in Middle Ages Europe, we saw in the development of agriculture as well as trade.